This is 5, now how London's most notorious gangsters made their money on the inside.
Looking like a wealthy businessman enjoying a private lunch at the gym, this is gangland boss Reg Kray in prison.
Reg was running an empire from his prison cell.
Still chairman of the board and running the family firm after 30 years behind bars.
I think he earned £5 million in the 35.
Like any company boss, the health of the balance sheet is the priority.
Every day, payday to Reg Kray.
It's business as usual, violence and money being top of the agenda.
Their whole lives was about money. Money, money, money.
To finance a lifestyle of privilege and favour behind bars.
They were earning thousands and thousands of pounds per week while they were inside prison.
Tonight, people whose lives have been irrevocably affected by the Krays talk for the first time. March 1969. Ron and Reg Kray were found guilty of murder at the Old Bailey. Mr. Justice Melford Stevenson, sentencing them to life imprisonment, told them, "I'm not going to waste words on you. In my view, society has earned a rest from your activities, and I recommend that you be held for at least 30 years.
When the van pulled up to the Bailey and took them away, that's when the big time started for the twins. The real big time, big bucks, not the penny ante stuff that went on before. The whole gangster syndrome started for them in 1969. That's when they started making big, big dough.
Locked behind bars, many believed the Krays' world of violence and menace had come to an end. Nothing could have been further from the truth. For the next 30 years from their prison cells, Ron and Reg Kray ran a multi-million-pound empire, financing a life of luxury and favour behind bars. The Krays made more money inside prison than they did outside.
I know they still continue to run an empire, both of them, from inside prison. They'd open clubs. They'd tell people by letter or by phone to go to those clubs. There was money exchanging hands to open clubs, to take over pubs, betting offices, record shops, snooker halls. The things, really, that they did whilst they were out.
But just how big were the Krays before they were jailed?
In the underworld, so-called, they were very much halfway down the pecking order. They were not East End gangsters, they were Bethnal Green gangsters, very, very local. They could never move outside that area without being told where to go if they tried to flex their muscles outside their own little patch. On their own little patch, of course, they were pretty formidable.
The Krays were very big fish in a very small pond. There were other gangs in London when they were at their reign, just as big, some bigger and more clever than what they were.
It was a lot easier to run Bethnal Green 35 years ago, and there was only 15,000 people in Bethnal Green. Now there's 255,000 people, and half of them don't even speak English, and they wouldn't listen to the two tasty geezers who owned the snooker hall down the road, whoever they were.
The Krays started off as local thugs, hooligans, protection money, etc. They used the talents they had in...
They'd both be very, very violent, yeah. Ronnie was the more violent. Reggie was the worst one to upset. If Ron never had his medication, as he told me, he said, I would go mad, he said. You know, they're the only thing that really stopped me from going insane. He used to rant and lose his temper, and his face used to really distort. But Reggie was very calm. He'd done things very coldly, you know. If he was going to stab you, he'd just stab you.
I think where Ronnie would have killed in anger, Reggie would have killed in hate. I can remember someone coming into the club and Reggie Kray shoving a comb through their cheeks. Reggie had a long-tailed aluminium-type comb, steel comb, which he shoved through the man's cheeks, both cheeks, tied in a knot, They rolled him up in a carpet and took him out.
They weren't rough, really rough people. They were quite gentlemen, you know. It was only if you crossed their path the wrong way that you suffered.
Upsetting the Krays brought swift retribution.
And Reggie had a big 8-inch hunting knife with a barbed edge on it. And he stuck it through Mickey Morris's arm, and obviously he screamed. I said, pack it up, because I said, you're going to have people run up the stairs. And Ronnie said, never mind about packing it up. He said, do it properly, Reg, do it properly. Put it up his guts, put it up his guts.
Violence begot violence. They knew it paid off. So, being twins, the Krays, everybody feared them.
That fear, generated by the Krays' love of violence, helped them build a powerful extortion racket in the East End.
They had what they called their regular pensions to collect. That was from, like, protection from clubs and gambling casinos and things like that. And then they had their fingers in a lot of other pies, like, you know, where they'd demand a little bit here and a little bit there off of people who had done naughty things but they couldn't really go to the police about, so they'd get money that way.
They would hear of the misdeeds of other young criminals in the East End, and they would want their pickings. They were known in the East End as thieves' ponces. That means that they steal off the thieves or take proceeds of their crimes.
I reckon they were on an average, like in the 60s, which was a lot of money, about 3,000 or 4,000 quid a week.
But the money wasn't ever going in and smashing a place up. It was already there. In actual fact, you went in, you had a cup of tea or a pint, you were made to feel quite at home. And any complaints, it was like television repairman coming. People were looking forward to you coming. Because if they had any problems, they'd tell you the problems, you'd take them back to the Krays. And then the violent side of the Krays, or the people who carried out the violent side for the Krays, it would be passed on to them.
The Krays' activities had now attracted the attention of the top echelons at Scotland Yard. Superintendent Leonard Nipper Reid was one of the special team ordered to bring the twins' reign to an end. Sidney Vaughan was going to be one of his key witnesses.
The police wanted convictions, but wanted to use me to get the convictions. They wanted me to actually say that I was witness and there when the Krays had demanded money with menaces. Eventually it ended up in the Old Bailey. The evidence I gave to the court wasn't what the police wanted, so I was made an hostile witness.
The case against the twins collapsed. Within hours they contacted Sidney Vaughan.
Brothers grateful. Financial aid tonight. 5:45 Clerkenwell Tavern Pub, opposite Mount Pleasant Post Office. Tell no one.
I received a telegram saying that money was being offered to me for my aid, etc. by the brothers. No money was ever forthcoming.
Now believing they were untouchable, the Krays moved into London's prosperous West End. But their business techniques lacked sophistication.
I think the Krays in the West End of London were a fish out of water. So they couldn't hold the same kind of code of silence, the same kind of code of loyalty. They couldn't put pressure on people who were already paying other gangsters, if you like, or other organisations.
Seduced by glamour and glitz, the Krays adopted a high profile, mixing with the rich and famous. Judy Garland, Barbara Windsor and Ronnie Fraser, and boxing legend Joe Louis, along with politicians and lords of the realm.
Ronnie loved the glitterous showbiz life. When Judy Garland was here, they took her to one of the local pubs, and they had a piano going and that in the pub. And Ronnie, she said to Ronnie, Judy Garland, I'll do a song. So Ronnie went over to this old girl and he said to her, do you know who that is over there, Annie? So she said, no. He said, it's Judy Garland. And she said to him, piss off. And he said, yeah, it's really Judy Garland. And she sang a couple of numbers in the pub.
we were meeting or had clientele such as Brian Epstein, Larry Parnes and these people, their way of life gave the Krays an opportunity, in particular Ronnie Kray, an opportunity to see a side where money could be made. This brought in the mafia connections for the Beatles, because the mafia were very interested in that time in getting the Beatles into Las Vegas, because they had all the other big people there. Every stars ended up in Las Vegas, but the Beatles never did. But it never came off, although I think, well, I know Brian Epstein paid Ronnie money. He never actually signed any parts of the Beatles over.
In March 1965, the Krays were forced to temporarily abandon the bright lights of the West End and go into hiding when Ron killed a rival gang member, George Cornell. Believing Cornell had made insulting remarks about him, Ron walked into the Blind Beggar pub in the Mile End Road and shot him in the head.
George had no respect for Ronnie or Reggie.
Well, well, well. Mr. Kray.
He used to say that Ronnie was a big fat puff. He told May Morris, who was Mickey Morris's mother, that Ronnie was after her son for, like, sexual activities. And Ronnie found out about this, and he was very, very angry. And it was about a fortnight later that Ronnie shot George in the Blind Beggar.
You haven't got the bottle.
Anyone who gave evidence against the Kray twins was very brave indeed. But I think one of the bravest women I've ever met was Patricia, a very gallant woman, a barmaid in the Blind Beggar Public House in March of '66.
I was talking to George. He was a regular customer, and all of a sudden he said, "Look who's here." And as I turned, Ronnie Kray came in with another fella, and as they came level, Ronnie and the other chap just suddenly had guns in their hand, shot George, and then turned towards me. And it's the only time I think I've seen Ronnie smile. And I thought, I think he's going to shoot me. And I realised that if I ran up the stairs, I could get shot in the back. So I just ran for the cellar and jumped the whole of the cellar stairs.
And a shot was fired at Patricia, which whizzed past her ear into the wall behind her. It was probably an attempt to silence her forever.
And I was scurrying round there like a frightened rabbit. I was trying to get behind barrels, crates, and realising there was just nowhere to hide. And I've never been so scared in all my life. And then it went very, very quiet. And I came up the stairs, and Patsy, the governor of the pub, said to me, "Who is it?" And I said, "George Cornell." And I said to him, "Get me tea towels out of the steriliser." But I didn't realise how much of the back of his head was missing. All the blood was coming from the back and bits of brain. And I was trying to hold it together.
What a brave woman, after 2 years, to come forward and give evidence of what she saw.
"18 months after Ron Kray shot George Cornell, it was Reggie's turn to commit a high-profile murder. The Krays commandeered the flat of a local woman, Carol Green, forcing her to go to the home of her neighbour and best friend, Kitty Diamond. Later that evening, local villain Jack the Hat McVitie was lured to the flat in Evering Road on the pretext of a party. When Carol returned in the early hours with her boyfriend, she walked into a nightmare.
Somebody came up the stairs and said to me, "I'm sorry, Carol, you can't go downstairs. There's been a little bit of trouble and we're trying to clear the place up for you a bit. We don't want you to see it in such a mess." And there was a member of the firm walking up the lower basement stairs, and he had a washing up bowl in his hand. And the washing up bowl was full with water, but you could see that the water was absolutely running in blood. I was made to go and wait in my bedroom. I could hear various noises outside. There was people up and down the stairs, and at one point it sounded as if somebody was being dragged along somewhere. And also, I'm sure at some time I heard somebody say, "Have you got the hat?" or "Don't forget the hat." And that is when Jack the Hat immediately came into my brain, because you always associated Jack with his hat. My boyfriend obviously was also sitting there listening to all this that was going on, and he turned to me and he said, "I'm telling you, they've topped someone." And I said, oh, please don't say that. They wouldn't do that here. But they had.
She was ashen, and I said to her, "What's the matter?" And she was crying and hysterical, and she said, "I think they've killed Jack." When we went over and we went down the stairs, I couldn't believe what I saw. I just saw blood everywhere. There was blood on the furniture, on the couch. There was blood on the walls. The window was smashed. There literally was blood everywhere. It looked like a slaughterhouse.
Reg stabbed Jack the Hat in the neck, severing his jugular vein.
About 6 months after the murder, I was told that Reg would like to see me, and I went down there, and he was there with about 4 or 5 of his henchmen, and so-called. And he said to me that he'd heard that I was saying that they'd killed Jack the Hat. And I said, no, I hadn't. And he said, if we find out that you have, we will kill you and your 3 sons, and we won't think twice about it. In his books, he writes that I was a prosecution witness against him, even though he paid for my husband, Billy Collins' defence, which is an outright lie. Not a mistake, a lie.
The flourishing combination of lies, myths and rumours which followed the murders of Cornell and McVitie enhanced the Krays' reputation.
People wanted to really know what the Krays were about. Was it true that they were 6 foot deep voices? Was it true that they were killers who had bodies under every motorway flyover in the UK? Was it true that they'd killed 20 or 30 or 40 or 50? How many bodies were around? Who knew?
When we all talk about the number of people the Krays killed, they didn't necessarily go out and kill these people themselves, but they got others in to do the jobs for them.
They had their own personal things, but they didn't go around smashing everybody up. Only the people they didn't like personally. The others was just business to them. And they'd send their lieutenants to do the violent side.
How many did Ron actually kill? Maybe a half dozen. How many did Reg actually kill? Maybe 2 or 3, something like that. But how many did they have their members of the gang kill? It was a lot. All in all, they got rid of, I reckon, around 30 people.
How they used to get rid of their bodies was they had a Polish fella. He was an elderly man over in South London, and he used to smelt aluminium. What he used to do, sometimes he used to have to hang on to the bodies for a little while till he could get rid of them. So he used to deep freeze them, so he got no smell, no blood or anything like that about the place. Once the body was frozen up, he used to take the bodies out, saw the bodies up and burn them, cremate them like in pieces in an aluminium smelt.
A number of the firm have talked about the incinerators. There's the graveyards. They get into the graveyard before a body was put in the hole. They put a body in the hole, put some earth on top, a new coffin would come in on top. They double up in the coffins at the funeral parlour. Then, of course, there was the Freddie Foreman trick of getting rid of the bodies at sea. That's what happened to Jack the Hat. He fed the crabs off the coast of Kent. No body, no crime. It was one of Ron's favourite expressions.
Confident they were invincible, Ron, in 1968, decided to expand internationally and forge links with the American mafia.
That time when Ron went to America, to New York, to meet the mafia, the families, I think he was very much under scrutiny by the police, who had informers that they had slipped into him. People like Alan Cooper and Joe Kaufman, they were just informants, grasses, if you like, agents provocateurs. And this Alan Cooper particularly, he was an American, a very short little fellow with a lisp and a stutter, and his stutter became worse the longer he was in the Twins company. It got very pronounced. It took them to meet the mafia. He might have met a couple of street hoods, a couple of, shall we say, crew members, but he never met any mafia as such. All he met were actors, people who looked like Italian waiters, Zapata moustaches, big overcoats. Hiya, baby. How you doing? How you doing, Ron? He came back. He was over the moon. He really thought this is it, the big link up between him and his twin and the mafia. It's ludicrous. Ludicrous.
Whether ludicrous or not, Scotland Yard viewed the proposed alliance with alarm and launched a massive operation to end the Kray's rule. Finally, the wall of silence, which for so long had protected the Krays, was pierced. In May 1968, the three brothers and 8 other gang members were arrested and charged with murdering George Cornell and Jack McVitie and conspiracy to kill.
After they were arrested, Ronnie wanted Albert Donahue to say that he killed Jack the Hat, and he wanted Ronnie R to say that he killed George Cornell. And they said they'd take the rap for all the long firms and all the other little cases of violence. Ronnie liked obedience, and he was very angry and annoyed when they wouldn't do it.
Key witnesses were now prepared to stand up against the Kray gang. 3 women were crucial prosecution witnesses: Kitty Diamond, Carol Green, and Patricia Kelly. After giving evidence, all 3 lived in fear for many years. 2 were given new identities. After an 8-week trial, Ron and Reg were jailed for life. Charlie was sentenced to 10 years. As they were driven away to start their sentences, many believed Britain's most dangerous organised crime empire had finally been smashed. But they could not have been more wrong.
They weren't organised. They were the most disorganised criminals prior to 1969, certainly I've ever heard of and knew of. But since their incarceration, then it became a real organised enterprise. The Kray Empire started in April 1969.
In episode 2, how the Kray Empire flourished and grew behind bars.